again, everybody. It is time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, when you and I last convened, we had an entire Big Ten championship weekend prepared, games galore, and then by the weekend we had just a few games. We had guys missing, and Ohio State went to Indianapolis, a very subdued Big Ten championship, no confetti. They didn't have the regular stage. They didn't have the end zones painted with Ohio State and Northwestern. They had Indianapolis cold stuff everywhere. It was kind of a letdown, and then Ohio State's play was kind of a letdown.
I think you're being generous, but yeah, I mean, a win's a win, but there were definitely a lot of issues that we'll talk about in our podcast that need to be cleaned up before Ohio State takes the field again, because it could make for not only an early exit, but an ugly one if they don't take care of some of the things we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, it's very curious. You know, I kind of was away from the news and the insider board for a few days, and so to me, it was a big surprise to tune in on Saturday and see that there was no Chris Olave, no Jackson Smith and Jigba, no most of the secondary, no Baron Browning. And so I thought, well, okay, but at least they got the offensive line back, and this could be fine. And I think what we saw on Saturday was that when Chris Olave is out, to me it looks like this is a chain reaction type thing. Is that you don't have to focus on Chris Olave, so you give more attention to Garrett Wilson, and then everything sort of flows from there. It kind of reminds me of when Ohio State played Florida in the national championship game, and Ted Ginn Jr. got hurt, and then it was like, well, now you don't have to worry about Ted Ginn, so now your best cover man can be on the next best receiver, and so forth. And it has a little bit of a trickle-down effect, and it's not that Ohio State receivers don't have a lot of talent, a lot of speed, a lot of ability. It's that they don't have a lot of games under their belt.
Very good points all around. I will say that the fact that Ohio State, their offense has, I don't want to say revolved around Chris Olave. I don't think that would be the appropriate term, but has included Chris Olave to such a large extent. To me, that's one of the warning signs of going into the bowl season, is that Ohio State's going to need to somehow get through to Justin Fields that just because Chris Olave may not be on the field, that there are other options and alternatives in the passing game. So, like I said, got some things to take care of between now and January 1st.
Yeah, and another part of that is, too, that Justin Fields' thumb, we don't know when exactly he hurt it, I don't think, but it was obvious that he didn't look right early on. There was a deep pass down the right sideline that was about 3 yards out of bounds that you don't normally see. There were a few airmailed passes, a little high, that Garrett Wilson had to go up and make a couple of really good catches. There was one where Wilson was wide open, and if he hits him in stride, he's going to get the first down and might be able to make a man miss and get a touchdown. Instead, he had to jump way up for it and catch it. By the time he came down, the defense had closed. I think it was about a 5-yard gain instead of a nice chunk play. So, and then of course, right after that, he throws one too low on a corner pattern, and it's intercepted. A nice one-handed play, but that could have been better ball location. It was pretty clear that Justin Fields wasn't quite himself on Saturday.
And I can only hope that, when it came to like the physical ailments, like you said, maybe that thumb was bothering him earlier in the game. I just saw a lot of just very questionable decisions in terms of holding on to the ball way too long. In terms of like you said, the mechanics of his passes, as you said, it could have been the thumb was injured earlier in the game than anyone realized, but very disconcerting play from Justin Fields in arguably one of the biggest games for Ohio State this season.
And we're not really sure what his instructions are. Is he being instructed to hang on to it? Don't put it in harm's way. If you don't like what you see, kind of wait and see what develops. Don't take a penalty. That kind of thing. We're not really sure what instruction he's getting, but he certainly had some chances to throw some balls away, to tuck it and run earlier. There were some opportunities to get the ball to tight ends that were ignored. And again, you're not sure. It's like, well, we've had trouble protecting. Maybe you go two reads and then check down or run. But, there were some cases where, like, Luke Farrell was open in the end zone with no one anywhere near him. There was a check down attempt to get it to Trey Sermon on a third down that the ball was batted down where he had Jeremy Ruckert to his left that looked like he had no one around him. And I think that's just part and parcel of the offense this season. Early in the year we saw Jeremy Ruckert, targeted in the in the end zone, in the red zone, and we haven't seen that in several weeks. And it's like the team has gone away from using the tight end, and so it's kind of hard to beat up Justin Fields for not looking for his tight ends when they haven't been using them since about the third game of the season.
Well, all I can suggest is let's go back to looking at some of those earlier game films where the tight end was a viable option, because in my estimation, I think regardless of whether we're talking Luke Farrell or Jeremy Ruckert, I think the tight end is going to need to be more involved in the passing game going into the bowl game against Clemson on January 1st.
Oh, certainly. And I think this was a case of a game where I thought they could hit Jeremy Ruckert down the seam and make some plays that way against this defense. It looked like there were some plays there to be made, and that kind of bore out on Saturday where guys were open in those areas, and there were just no throws, and it was difficult to watch at times, but it was really difficult to watch in that every time they ran the ball they were successful, but then they would go 2 or 3 plays without running it. They would run it once, they'd get 9 yards, and then they would go back to passing, go pass and pass, 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 pass. And it was clear that Northwestern couldn't stop the run pretty early on. And I've always been a big believer that even if you're not successful running the football, you have to run the football in the first half to establish what you're going to do, and that sets up other things later. So, we saw a day that we have never seen before from an Ohio State running back. Trey Sermon went insane, 331 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an average of 11.4 yards per carry. And I think he had 5 or 6 carries at halftime. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that he could have run for 500 yards on Saturday had they just given him the ball a dozen times in the first half.
It was certainly very puzzling. Like you said, they would be running the ball effectively and then all of a sudden go away from it. So I have no doubt in my mind that the regular beat reporters, when the opportunity presents itself to ask Ryan Day about some of the decisions to abandon the running game, as you said accurately, when it was so successful, what was the logic behind that? Because I think, for all of the criticism that Jim Tressel used to get for Tressel ball and being so predictable and so methodical, one thing that you could say is that if something was working, he stuck with it, and this past weekend was very, very maddening, for lack of a better word, when trying to understand why are you going away from the running game, like you and I both agree that it was working so well, just to only put it in the hands of a passing game that was sputtering. That would probably be the most generous term that I would use.
Yeah, and they were making some plays earlier in the game, in the passing game, but then it just kind of, the wheels kind of completely fell off, and I don't know how much of that had to do with Fields' thumb, how much of it had to do with what Northwestern was doing, because, they were dropping a lot of guys into coverage. There were a lot of times when there were only 5 men in the box, and that's when everybody on Twitter was like, why are you not running the ball against this front? You've already been successful anyway, and they're daring you to run the ball. Just go ahead and run the ball. And, eventually they did go to that in the second half and, of course, had great success with it. But it shouldn't have taken them that long. I know that, Ryan Day was asked after the game on Saturday about it, and he said, well, we always want to stay aggressive and try to make big plays and this and that and the other. And it's like, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but I don't buy it, because there was a quick change possession in this game where I think it was after Proctor's interception, where I thought this is a perfect time to fake it to Trey Sermon, because he had so much success here in the second half, just play action and go get your big play now. And instead, they hand it to him. And of course, Northwestern was sitting on that, and it was one of the few negative plays. It was a -2 yard rush for Sermon. And I thought, oh man, of all the times when you could have probably hit for your home run play, that was probably the play.
Like I said, I just think it was one of these things where, a cascading effect of Chris Olave not being in the offense would lead you to believe that when you're missing such a viable part of the passing game, that it's going to force you to adjust your game plan, regardless of whether it's including the tight ends more and or relying on the running game. It just seemed very discombobulated the entire game throughout. Fortunately for Ohio State, it worked out, but against a team like Clemson, who they're going to be playing next, they're not going to have that flexibility, to kind of, allow themselves to be behind, because the next thing you know, against a team like Clemson, which has a very explosive offense, you could be, sitting there, down, 3 touchdowns before you know it, because of, I'm just going to say, a stubbornness with trying to make something work that obviously is not.
Well, we'll have to see how they come out and game plan for Clemson. This is a game that they have been trying to get back to since the end of last season. Obviously, they're going to be up for it. There's going to be a lot of emotion about this game. This is something they've been looking forward to. This game against Northwestern bothered me right from the get-go when Sean Wade said, we need to blow them out. I don't like hearing that, because that's not the proper approach. The proper approach is go take care of your business, and you will blow them out, because you have way more talent, and talent wins out usually. If you work as hard as they do, your talent will win out over theirs if you don't make a ton of mistakes. And they did make a ton of mistakes in this game and still won it, even on a day they didn't play well, which tells me if they had matched Northwestern's intensity in this game, they could have won this game by 4 touchdowns.
Well, Northwestern is well coached. We talked about that last week. And we also knew that they were going to come into this game, trying to play at a pace that was conducive to their style, which they were successful at. Now, Ohio State, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and hopefully that they will between now and January 1st.
You bring up an interesting point, Chip, because one of the things that really puzzled me about this game, when you mentioned the pace of the game and the Northwestern playing, their game and that kind of thing, it really surprised me, Ohio State getting the ball first, and how they came out using every bit of the play clock all the way down the field. And that's so un-Ohio State-like. And I'm like, what is going on that they're using this much time as they go, as they get down the field? And they still get in the end zone, but it's called back on a hold that didn't need to happen. Harry Miller with a holding penalty on a guy who's not going to catch Justin Fields from where he was held. Justin Fields already had the angle on him. It was going to be an easy touchdown. And, of course, Harry Miller can't exactly know where Justin Fields is when he commits the hold. But at the same time, don't hold the guy. And instead, Ohio State settles for an early field goal. And, that's got to be a big win for the Wildcats. They get a big lift emotionally. They stop the mighty Ohio State offense, which really stopped itself. And then they go down the field and they score as Peyton Ramsey turns into Peyton Manning, and I think he hit his first 9 passes in a row.
Yeah, give credit to Northwestern for attacking Ohio State's defense in a way that I don't think anyone could have truly anticipated. Obviously Kerry Combs, and Ohio State eventually made some adjustments, but yeah, Northwestern came out and certainly had a very aggressive game plan that was completely atypical of anything that you or I, or probably most Ohio State fans, were anticipating.
Yeah, it was very surprising to see Ohio State, get Northwestern in 3rd and longs and then not bring guys to put pressure on Ramsey, and also on the back end play zone. I saw a lot of zone on 3rd and longs, and they were just easy pitch and catch for Ramsey, and they came down the field, made it 7-3. They eventually made it 10-3. I believe it could have been worse if not for a Justin Hilliard interception in the end zone to start the second half. It was 10-6 at halftime, Northwestern, and Hilliard with the interception in the end zone. I think on the first drive of the second half, really kept Northwestern from sort of putting the dagger in. I think it was a little early for the dagger, but it certainly would have been a very uphill battle for Ohio State if they had gone down 17-6 at that point.
Yeah, I'm so happy for Justin Hilliard. I mean, he certainly played, I would say, the best game of his Ohio State career in a game that, when it was needed most. I mean, like he certainly played not only the interception, but just all throughout, played with a lot of heart. And so I just think Ohio State, it certainly seemed as though I kind of got the impression, you were talking about earlier about, previous games, you referenced the loss to Florida in the national championship game. In a lot of ways, I kind of felt that Ohio State was just out of sync throughout most of the game. It reminded me of when Ohio State played and lost to Michigan State back in 2013 in the Big Ten championship, where like they were out of sync throughout most of the game. For most of the game, it just certainly felt like Ohio State was out of sync offensively and defensively. So Justin Hilliard was a rare exception to that on Saturday.
Yeah, and you can add the Purdue game and the Iowa game in recent years. I don't even have to tell you which one it was because there was only one that sticks out, as games where they just didn't seem to be quite right on either side of the football. But Ohio State kind of got it together defensively. They started to run the football. They played great defense in the second half. They gave up some yards, at least early in the half, but didn't give up any more points after halftime. And Justin Hilliard, you said it. I mean, if it wasn't for what Trey Sermon did, Justin Hilliard would have been MVP of this game because, he led Ohio State with 9 tackles, 5 solo, 4 assists. He had 2 tackles for loss. He recovered a fumble and he had an interception to end a very promising Northwestern drive. Justin Hilliard made plays all over the field on Saturday.
And for a young man who, I mean, the trials and tribulations that Justin Hilliard has experienced during his Ohio State career to come up big when Ohio State needed him to do so. It's certainly going to be, one of these, this game is going to be well remembered by Ohio State fans, like that kind of a performance by Justin Hilliard for many years to come.
You also wonder what would the final score have looked like had Ohio State scored a touchdown at the end of the half rather than thrown the interception at the end of the half, because that would have been a big lift going into the break to have played poorly, but to still have come back down and taken the lead just before halftime. But in the second half, like I said, Trey Sermon got things going to the point where it just seemed like it wasn't a matter of if he would break Eddie George's record. It was like he will. If they get the ball back enough times, he will certainly break it, and he eventually did, and could have scored again. But again, Ohio State doesn't like to throw up the style points or embarrass anybody, so they sat on the ball at the end of the game when they could have scored again. The 10-6 game was. I guess ostensibly over since Northwestern didn't score any more points when Sermon scored with 2:41 remaining in the third. Then Blake Hobbiel added a short field goal again, this was a play where I felt like play calling was an issue all day. There were some weird gadget plays that we've never seen before that didn't have any chance of working. And this was a case where I thought, run the ball on third down, and if you don't make the 3 or 4 yards you need, you got a fourth down, and you've got a guy who essentially is unstoppable this half. And they decided to throw the ball again, and Hobbiel has to kick a short field goal. Sermon added another 3-yard touchdown run later in the fourth quarter to make it 22-10 as the final. And it was just not a great performance, but at the end of the day, Ohio State, got in a rock fight with Northwestern, which you never want to do, and found a way to win it.
And for the first time in the Big Ten Conference's history, a 4 straight conference winner in Ohio State. So congratulations. It was not pretty. There were a lot of frustrating moments for Ohio State fans to endure, but I'll take the win. I think, as you said, there were a lot of very perplexing calls, in terms of gadget plays that made you wonder, why are you calling that now? Especially, it just seemed as though the offensive play calling left a lot to be desired. And I can only hope that, going into this, that there's a little bit of humility by the offensive coaching staff, including Ryan Day, including Justin Fields, that, all right, we don't have to be exotic and imaginative to win games. If that means relying on our offensive line and, we're going to run the ball, and, burn clock, so be it. I mean, I really don't care at this point. I just want to keep winning and advancing. And so I think, to me, that's kind of what I'm hoping, is that there's a little bit of self-reflection on, okay, don't overcomplicate this, stick with what's working and just keep at it.
Yeah, exactly. The final score, 22-10. Your prediction was 56-21. That was not even close. I expected a little more of a rock fight, but I still expected more points. I had 34-24. I think we were both way off the mark on this one, although, I guess, yeah, no, I'm not going to give either one of us a win here. This was bad on both of our parts, but again, I blame the players and the coaches.
Yeah. I freely admit, going into this, I thought, all right, that Ohio State, they're now, granted, didn't anticipate the exclusion of Chris Olave, didn't anticipate Justin Fields having difficulty throwing the ball, certainly didn't anticipate gadget plays that blew up. So that's where, like that idea of the scoring explosion that I had predicted, that's kind of where my rationale was. But I'm just happy to come away with a win for Ohio State, so that they won the Big Ten championship, which allowed them to be included into the college football playoff.
Yeah, that's the important thing. That's the important takeaway, and it remains to be seen which is the real Ohio State this year. It doesn't look like a team that, we were told they're laser focused, that, they're thinking about nothing but getting back after last year's loss. And I don't see a team that's laser focused. I don't think a team that's laser focused has a game canceled by Maryland because of COVID-19 and then goes out and gets its own outbreak. I don't think a team that's laser focused has an outbreak, they recover from it, and then they have more guys test positive. That doesn't scream laser focused to me. You lock down more when you see this stuff happening. You don't have more guys get it. And I get that it's a pandemic, and I get that it's really, really contagious, and it's hard to avoid everyone completely. But again, I mean, if they're laser focused and this is what they're working for, why are we still having problems, and we're still having positive cases, and we're still having contact tracing and having guys miss games?
Very good questions that, unfortunately, I can't even begin to fathom a reasonable answer. I will say that it certainly seems as though that you touched on it, and I know that both Gerd and Tom Orr talked about it in their podcast, that, the fact that Ohio State's only played 6 games, that they are kind of, for using, I think, the way Gerd referred to it, they can't find a rhythm, and so then it's a matter of trying to knock off the rust. So I think that there's a lack of focus, as you said, as it relates to the COVID outbreaks that have seemingly taken much more of a toll than any fans realized. So yeah, it's certainly puzzling to say, when you think about, that term laser focus, I don't know if I would use that category to describe Ohio State this season.
Yeah, some of these guys, Chip, are, have played one game in a month. So, some of the guys that have had positive tests, it's not a typical year. We knew that going in, but at the same time, I don't know how a team can play so few games and be ready. They're in early to mid-October form, and they're going up against a team that's in, college football playoff form. And we'll talk about that next week when we preview the game. But I don't like the way this is unfolded, and I think that this is this is one of those things where it could be, the doubters, the haters could all be saying, "We'll see this. This is why you shouldn't have put Ohio State in the college football playoff if they get blown off the field." Even though, I think this year for me, it seems like Alabama and Clemson are at a higher level than everyone else, and Alabama really at a much higher level than anyone else in the country. But again, we'll get to next week's preview all in good time. Let's go to our picks to click. You had on offense Justin Fields. I think it's fair to say that I can't think of anyone who clicked less than Justin Fields on Saturday, and I'm not trying to knock Justin Fields. Certainly the injury, missing one of his favorite weapons, all of that went into it, but still there were some bad reads, there was some poor decision making, there were some bad throws, and again, that's partially the thumb, but at the same time, you cannot say that Justin Fields clicked on Saturday, and as a result, my guy Garrett Wilson, who I thought maybe could have a huge day without Chris Olave, only 4 catches for 49 yards, no touchdowns. I would also say that Garrett Wilson, compared to what he normally does, did not come close to clicking.
Yeah, as far as Justin Fields goes, I originally thought that his contribution was going to be more on making plays with his legs. I'm not trying to suggest that I didn't think he was going to throw the ball. I'm just saying that I really thought he was going to kind of what he did, against Michigan State, tell you the truth, like that he was able to compensate for a inexperienced offensive line by making plays with his legs. I really thought that he was going to have a similar mindset and style of play, and he didn't do that. And I realize this is going to sound really harsh and overly critical, but I personally found Justin Fields' performance so dismaying that it made me wonder if he truly is contemplating about going to the NFL. I think this is the kind of game that the NFL scouts are going to be very, very harsh in their indictment of him, because some of the decisions that were made. Now, granted, we don't know the severity of that thumb injury, but I did not see a quarterback ready to play in the NFL based on that performance on Saturday. I mean, this was without a doubt probably the worst game that he's played since he's been in Columbus.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. I will just say that by and large, given his body of work, this is not a normal game for him. And he's, luckily for him, he's got at least one more opportunity to, show what he can do. And we'll see how he bounces back from this. That's part of it too, bouncing back from a bad game. I've seen Justin Herbert have terrible games in college, and he's turning into a pretty good pro as a rookie. So, past, what do they say about stocks? Past performance is not indicative of, not necessarily indicative of the future or whatever, but we'll see how that goes. Defensively, Chip, you had Pete Werner, and so I took Tuf Borland. And what I wasn't thinking of was, man, what if Baron Browning can't play? Then I should probably take Justin Hilliard. That didn't enter my mind, so it didn't enter my decision making. And you look at Pete Werner and Tuf Borland in this game, and they did about what we expected them to do. Borland had 7 tackles and Werner 5. Borland had a half a sack. But it always seemed like Werner and Borland were around the football. So I would say, they didn't put up huge numbers, but I think they put up pretty good numbers, and I would say they both clicked in this game.
They played well, but yeah, I think giving credit where credit is due. We talked about, Justin Hilliard. I think he was definitely the star of the show without doubt.
Sure. But more than one guy can click, Chip. And your guy, Pete Werner, forced a key fumble, without which Justin Hilliard would not have a fumble recovery.
Very good point.
All right. And I think my guy, Borland, should have got the full sack. Maybe I'm a little biased, but just give him a half of one. Anyway, that takes care of our wrap-up of the Big Ten Championship game. But again, it's like you wonder even how Did the guys just not get excited about this because they're focused on something further down the line? Did they not get hyped because man, the Colts couldn't even be bothered to take their logos off the field for this game? I mean, not that it was on the Colts. That's totally on the Big Ten. And I found it interesting that Kevin Warren was standing right behind Ryan Day as Ryan Day talked about all the difficulties that the team had to overcome, even to get to that point, even to have a chance to get to that point, to play actual football games this fall. And Kevin Warren's eyes said a lot to me as I watched him standing in the background while Ryan Day was saying that stuff.
Yeah, there's no love lost between the Ohio State coaching staff, certainly by the fan base, and let's just say Kevin Warren. He's got a lot of fence mending to do this offseason with not just the Ohio State coaching staff, but I think all of the respective Big Ten coaching staffs during the offseason, because his leadership has been found wanting.
Indeed. Well, we got a lot more that we can talk about, Chip, and we'll get to those topics right after this. All right, Chip. Well, with the Northwestern game behind us now, there's a lot more stuff that we can discuss. And one of those things we can discuss is it was a big day for the MVPs, and it was no surprise that the MVP on offense this week for Ohio State was, of course, Trey Sermon. You don't just break an Eddie George record and not be MVP. And Trey Sermon, I can't think of anybody that's ever been more deserving of a game MVP award than he was on Saturday.
And I think it established, besides not only the worthiness of Trey Sermon as the MVP, I think you finally see now why there was so much excitement about him coming into the season, because this is not meant disrespectfully about the other backs on the roster. But I think, when you compare his skill set compared to, for example, like a J.K. Dobbins, it's comparable. And I think that's probably what the coaching staff is looking for from a running back, that kind of skill set. And he displayed it with, as you said, breaking Eddie George's record, in a game where it was blatantly obvious, that Ohio State, they were going to rely on him to win the game. He came through in flying colors.
And this was one of those rare instances where also it was pretty obvious on the defensive side of the ball who the MVP was, and we've already talked about Justin Hilliard, but a very deserving guy to get the defensive MVP this week. And I think clearly if Trey Sermon doesn't go crazy like he does, he's Ohio State's, Ohio State still wins. He's player of the game for the Big Ten championship game.
I can only hope that Justin Hilliard's going to get an opportunity to play in the NFL. If he doesn't, though, and the way that his career concludes is from that stellar performance in the Big Ten championship game, what a way to go out.
It's maybe he should have been playing all along. That's all I'm saying. I mean, clearly he was injured, and he's had he's had plenty of injury issues, torn biceps, Achilles. I mean, just an incredible amount of adversity in his career, injury-wise. But it would be nice to see him stay on the field going forward, and hopefully come out and have a big game in the college football playoffs, and hopefully for Ohio State fans, 2 big games in the college football playoffs. The special teams player of the week was Zach Hoover. And again, this is a no-brainer, Chip. I mean, the first time he kicked one inside the 5, I was kind of like, I got distracted and I was like, oh, good job, Drew Chrisman. And I was like, oh, that's right, Drew Chrisman is out today. And then he did it again. I mean, Zach Hoover had a great game punting the ball.
He certainly did. And it's very reassuring to see a player like Zach Hoover who, let's face it, relegated to, opportunities like this, come shining through, when called upon and when the stakes were their highest, he played as well as he did.
Indeed. The The champions, all 5 starting offensive linemen and tight ends, Jeremy Ruckert and Luke Farrell, all graded out as champions. Obviously, Trey Sermon did. Julian Fleming, Cameron Babb were champions, and 4 wide receivers were champions in this game, although it's kind of weird to say when the passing game suffered so badly. I guess for Ruckert and Farrell, just continuing to be open, even if they weren't found, was probably enough there. Defensively, joining Hilliard, Jonathan Cooper. I thought Jonathan Cooper had a really nice game, even though he got flagged for horse collaring Peyton Ramsey's shoulder. And Tommy Togiai also graded out as a champion. And I think that's it. Is that it? No, there's got to be more than that. Haskell Garrett. Yeah, Haskell Garrett was good. Tyreek Smith, he had a really bad penalty. But other than that, he played pretty well. Teron Vincent, Zach Harrison, Sean Wade, Seven Banks, Josh Proctor, Marcus Williamson. I thought this was a good game from Marcus Williamson for the most part. I mean, he wasn't, you didn't see any of those big plays where he bites on it and lets the guy get behind him. But, of course, that's not how Northwestern's built. But I thought that he made some nice plays, especially had some tackles out on the edge where if he didn't make that tackle, the guy's going to get a big gain.
I agree. I think Marcus Williamson, the best thing that he contributed to on Saturday was the tackling. I also agree with what you said. He did not, bite on the play fakes like he had shown a tendency to do. Now, granted, we'll see when Ohio State plays Clemson if those good habits come shining through again. But yeah, I think Marcus Williamson had a really good game against Northwestern.
And congratulations to the Scout Team Players of the Week, Cameron Martinez, Daryl Sinclair, Patrick Gerd, who's not related to Tony Gerdeman, and Danny Vanatsky. So congrats to them. Let us turn our attention now, Chip, toward the National Signing Day, the early signing day. Very big day for Ohio State, of course. This is becoming a tradition, a fantastic class in terms of, star ratings, and where people were positioned in their overall rankings. Just an incredible haul. There were, you've got quite a class here, and there were no real surprises. There was, they had 21 guys that had committed and 21 signed, so that's pretty good.
Very good. And considering, I guess, just to kind of break it down, so much, the superlatives have been shared about how great this class is. A lot of the credit to these young men, the fact that a lot of them, they did not, obviously all of us have been affected by the coronavirus, but a lot of them, I mean, they kind of never really got to visit Ohio State. I mean, for example, Travion Henderson, running back from Virginia, he came up on his own in October, visited Ohio State unofficially. Jack Sawyer, who was the very first verbal commitment, kind of arranged kind of an impromptu gathering of all of the commitments, and so a lot of those players visited Ohio State on their own. One of the things that caught my eye is when I look at this recruiting class, as you said, 21 players, in terms of like when these players verbally committed, Ryan Day, and this is not meant with any disrespect to Urban Meyer, but Ryan Day has truly proven to be, a man of his word when he says that Ohio is going to be the backbone of the recruiting classes. For example, of the first 10 players that verbally committed, 6 of them were from the state of Ohio. And I'm not saying that you can't branch out. I mean, this class is very, very geographically diverse. Case in point being that they signed another Australian punter. I mean, who can't? How can you can't have enough Australian punters when you're Ohio State. But the fact that Ohio State has, in my estimation, reprioritized the state of Ohio, where it certainly felt like Urban Meyer kind of let that fall a little bit more by the wayside than I think the Ohio high school coaches wanted. I'm not saying that Jim Trussell, I think, was at one extreme. I think Ryan Day is finding that happy medium in between Jim Trussell, signing the vast majority of Ohio players and Urban Meyer signing very few. I think he's finding that just right Goldilocks kind of approach to signing Ohio players.
One thing that the Buckeyes just continue to do is load up at wide receiver. Chip, the talent coming in, Emeka Egbuka, the number 1 receiver, number 9 position of any position overall. You've got Jaden Ballard, a guy who's his highlight tape is pretty amazing. The number 8 receiver. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 15 receiver in the country. All these guys are in the top 100 recruits. Just another insane year for Brian Hartline.
It is. Brian Hartline has truly justified. There were so many concerns about Brian Hartline when he took over. Keep in mind, you're talking about a guy who had never coached before. Is he ready to do this? And he has truly justified that decision. I mean, as you said, like last year, Ohio State signed a stellar wide receiver class. They followed up with another one, and in the case of Emeka Egbuka, he was arguably the number 1 wide receiver in high school football, and he's coming into a crowded room, and that's a testament to the faith in Brian Hartline to not only develop him, but also he sees the fact that that competition that's within that room is not going to stand in his way. Like if he's good enough to play, Brian Hartline will get him out there on the field.
Yeah, and you're seeing these guys from the last couple classes out there, Garrett Wilson and Julian Fleming and Jackson Smith and Jigba we've seen this year. So just another great haul. You got, of course, another outstanding quarterback recruit, Kyle McCord, the number 3 pro-style quarterback. Jack Sawyer, of course, the number 3 defensive end, number 4 overall player, is a guy who a lot of people are expecting big things from. We're not going to call him Bosa-esque. We're not going to call him Chase Young-ish. We're just going to say, watch for Jack Sawyer.
And everything I have heard, I mean, I've never seen Jack Sawyer play football or, in the sense, but everything I've heard, from people like Bill Bank Green, on Buckeye Scoop is Jack Sawyer, I guess, is a tremendous basketball player. And I just bring that, to the attention that athletically, I mean, he's one of these guys. He was the very first verbal commitment. He's going to be on campus in January. So, I mean, I may have the numbers wrong. I think we talk about 21 players. I think 14 or 15 of these guys are going to be on campus. So hopefully, we're all hoping that the coronavirus makes its quick departure from our lives, so that we'll have spring football and that we'll have a spring game. Now, whether or not we'll be able to go to the spring game, I'm skeptical, but being able to actually see Jack Sawyer and some of these other highly touted freshmen in the Ohio State spring game is something I'm certainly keeping my fingers crossed for.
Indeed. Anything else you want to touch on about this recruiting class before we move on?
Just one quick point, and that is, you kind of keep an eye on how other teams do throughout the Big Ten, and that is, Ohio State signed, you talked about, Jack Sawyer and Kyle McCord and all these highly touted players, like 12 of the top 100 players in the country. The rest of the Big Ten signed 8. So, I mean, the rich keep getting richer. That talent gap between Ohio State and the rest of the conference is certainly, I don't want to say that it's growing. And 2 names to kind of keep in mind. J.J. McCarthy, who's a quarterback, and running back Donovan Edwards. The reason why is I certainly have all of the full faith and confidence in Ryan Day and the coaches, but both of those young men went to that team up north. For a while, J.J. McCarthy was, strongly interested in an Ohio State offer. Same thing with Donovan Edwards, and the Ohio State coaches decided to go in another direction. And so it's going to be interesting to see what kind of career those 2 young men respectively have playing for that team up north, especially when they come to play against the Buckeyes.
Well, and as we were having a very good signing day, watching Ohio State's, you know, the letters coming in and the announcements coming in, Michigan had a kid flip to Maryland and another kid flip to, I believe it was UCLA. So, when you're losing kids to Maryland and UCLA, and your rival is putting together a class like Ryan Day did, that's not going to make their fan base any happier. And have we heard what's the latest on the extension of Jim Harbaugh?
That's a really good point. And I wish I had a definitive answer for you. It's still kind of in the to be determined category, that for lack of a better word, because everything that we have speculated is that it's at a reduced salary and a lower buyout. So a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, that's going to be jolting to his pride, Harbaugh's pride. Is he going to stick around? But by the same token, does he truly want to leave Ann Arbor, which is his alma mater, not being successful? I mean, so it's kind of a, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Nobody really knows. But my belief is he'll be back. But, because I can only imagine, like we talked about it last week, what it could be like for any of these young men that signed, and for Harbaugh to possibly say, I'm out, what that would do, what kind of a gaping hole that would have, especially with players being able to transfer right away, like they're allowed to leave right away. Like you said, like they lost some commitments down the way. It's not looking good.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so Chip, around the Big Ten this week, as I mentioned at the top of the show, some cancellations. Indiana and Purdue mutually agreed to cancel their game due to COVID-19 concerns, and so I think that puts to rest any talk about how Indiana got screwed, even though they lost the head-to-head matchup with Ohio State. It's unclear if the Hoosiers could have played in the Big Ten championship game, and they did not get to play their rivals this year. Michigan avoided a 2-5 season because their game with Iowa was canceled, and Michigan State, Maryland, a game that no one wanted to see. Thankfully, no one had to see it.
Yeah, nobody had to see it. Yeah, I mean, this whole, I think the impact the coronavirus has had on all of our lives. But I mean, this decision by the Big Ten to postpone the season, not allow for the flexibility of rescheduling games. I think Gerd had a really good tweet. I'm sure that you saw. He's like, remember when the Big Ten wanted to go, start the season and, late, like we were supposed to start like in January, and think about what we're seeing on a national level. I mean, like that's the thing, like for all of the national media that were so critical of the Big Ten getting back into this, and how dare you, do this? It's like, well, if they had waited until January, where it's now worse, how? I mean, again, like nobody ever really has stood up and said, yeah, the Big Ten, they made the right decision. Now, granted, they should never have canceled in the first place. They should have followed the lead of the other conferences and build in weeks for possible makeup games. So,
Well, let me play devil's advocate on behalf of Kevin Warren here. What if they'd waited till like the end of January and everybody got vaccinated?
well, I think we're playing a true wishing game, because everything I have read is that when it comes to the vaccination, like in terms of the availability of it, that's a work in progress. I mean, I know that college football is extremely important, but I just really don't know where it falls on the pecking order of who's going to get it. So, yeah, Kevin Warren, I'm sure that would be, nothing would make him happier than, oh yeah, by the way, like, every athlete within the Big Ten footprint is going to be vaccinated. But my belief is we're going to be waiting until probably the summer for young people such as the football players on Ohio State's roster to get that vaccination.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of money involved, Chip, though, and where money is involved, things seem to not quite be as, equal as you might otherwise expect. So you never know what could happen. But yeah, I'm obviously being facetious in playing devil's advocate on behalf of Kevin Warren, who botched the start of the season pretty badly. Around the Big Ten, Chip, another game no one wanted to see: Nebraska and Rutgers, and the Cornhuskers finish at 3-5 with a 28-21 win over Rutgers. I watched 10 plays in this game, and Adrian Martinez played pretty well. I mean, he made some plays with his feet, made some plays with his arm, and maybe played a little bit more like Adrian Martinez that we expected. 24 of 28, 255 yards and a touchdown, as Rutgers goes 3-6 under Greg Schiano. But that is, this is a bad Rutgers team, and Greg Schiano got them to play competitively. Even their losses, a lot of them were close. One score loss to Nebraska, an overtime loss to Michigan. I think there was a 3 overtime loss to Michigan. And, I think Greg Schiano has a lot to build on.
A tremendous amount to build on. He has dramatically improved the competitive landscape within that program, far faster than I think you or I or anyone else could have truly anticipated. So that's a welcome sight to be seen. As far as Nebraska, talking about Adrian Martinez, I think, you're kind of at a fork in the road, so to speak, if you're Scott Frost, and this is not meant with any disrespect towards Adrian Martinez, but there's so much of a belief that, okay, they need to move on from Adrian Martinez. Personally, I think Martinez is certainly it's certainly worthwhile to keep him at the helm of the quarterback position. But next year, I think is a truly pivotal year for Scott Frost, because I think that the patience is starting to wear thin, even though he is one of Nebraska's favorite sons.
Yeah, you would think so. The results have not been anywhere near what anybody expected, considering what he did at UCF. So he's certainly on the hot seat if he survives the offseason. Next season, I think the leash is going to be pretty short. The Wildlings up north of the wall in Game of Thrones parlance played this weekend, Chip, a barn burner that went into overtime, and Wisconsin gets a victory and gets back to 500 with a 2017 win over Minnesota. And then immediately PJ Fleck said, we're not going to go to a bowl game. Our 3-4 Gophers are just not going to go.
Yeah, it's been a rough year for Minnesota. I mean, they've been racked by the coronavirus, and as far as Wisconsin goes, it's just been, I think you hit it right on the head last week when we were talking about it. It seemed as though they peaked in game 1, and it's just been downhill ever since.
And the last remaining game in the Big Ten this weekend, Chip, was Illinois at Penn State. The Illini go to Happy Valley without Lovie Smith, who was dumped by the Illini. And this game was 21-21 after the first quarter, and it ended with a 56-21 Penn State victory. And so the Illini decided that one quarter is enough. We're pretty much good. We're done for the day. And showing that drive, that fight that you want to see from the Illini as they welcome new coach, Chip. Bert is back in the Big Ten. Bret Bielema on his way to Champaign.
And I think you called this last week. I think you did. I mean, I'm certainly not going to give myself credit for it. I guess I can understand the logic. I want to just kind of throw this out here as a thought, is that, for all of the fun that Ohio State fans have about mocking Bert, is that I think he, was at his best when he was the head coach and he had Paul Chryst as his offensive coordinator. And it didn't seem altogether surprising that when he went to Arkansas, couldn't really replicate the magic because he didn't have Chryst on his coaching staff, and he's certainly not going to in Illinois. I can only hope, as an Ohio State fan who loves calling him Bert, is that he does a good job, because unless I'm mistaken, I was looking up the upcoming schedules. Ohio State does not play Illinois until 2024. So we're talking, man, you gotta make it at least to 2024. I may be mistaken. I may be wrong. But
Man,
maybe he can get him to the Big Ten championship. I don't know.
how is the Illabuck not a protected rivalry?
I'm just saying, it's like I may be mistaken. Maybe you or any of our fans can correct me. I was looking up future schedules, and I was trying to think when's the first time Ohio State's going to play Illinois, and it doesn't look like it's till 2024. So you can only hope that he's gonna make it at least 4 years so we can see him, unless he can really work his magic and get Illinois into the Big Ten championship game, and Ohio State faces them then.
Well, don't count Bert out in the Big Ten because he's proven he can win in this league. Of course, he did have Paul Chryst, as you mentioned. I like what you did there, Chip, because I sensed a very subtle James Taylor reference when you said mocking Bert.
That was unintentional, I can assure you.
Well, those are the best kind. Those are the best ones. But yeah, Bret Bielema is a guy like. I said it would be fun to have him back in the Big Ten just because he's going to start off he's going to get in an argument publicly with somebody else in the Big Ten. It's probably going to be Maryland recruiting. He's going to probably question Maryland's recruiting or something, and he's going to, there's going to be feuding, and there's going to be headlines, and there's going to be quotes in the paper, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to have Bielema back in the Big Ten. I think he can win at Illinois. I think as much as anybody can win at Illinois, I think that Bielema can, because he's sort of a coach who his rise to the top has halted, and I think he might be like more of a guy now who's like, okay, well, I took my shot, and now I'm just going to settle in and try to build a program and stay there. And I think that's really what Illinois needs, is somebody who's going to be committed to Illinois. And I think that Bielema could be that guy, unless the Iowa job comes open, which everybody in the world knows that he wants that.
I think one of the telling moments of his introductory press conference, I mean, you talk about suddenly becoming humble. He freely acknowledged that going 12-1 his first year as Wisconsin's head coach, that he all of a sudden he thought that, and I'm going to just use the names he referenced. He thought that he was Vince Lombardi, Tom Landry, and Bill Belichick all rolled into one as a result of that hot start. And I think you make a really good point that the events of the past years, where he left Wisconsin, which I don't know what kind of relationship he has with Barry Alvarez, but if it wasn't severed, was severely hurt, and then going to Arkansas, eventually being fired from that job, being out of football. I think he certainly can build a competitive team. I'm just kind of wondering, there's one thing to be said about, building up an offensive line, running the ball, like things that Wisconsin has done for years, using that Barry Alvarez model that Bielema inherited. It remains to be seen if he has kind of broadened his offensive philosophy, so we'll see.
Indeed. But we will have Bret Bielema back in the Big Ten, and if nothing else, it will be fun to watch, or at least interesting, and that's really all you can ask for from Illinois football at this point, is just please be interesting.
Right, and just Bret, you got to make it. You got to make it to 2024.
There you go.
Got to make it.
All right, Chip. So of course, Ohio State winning on Saturday against Northwestern should have put to rest any question about whether or not the Buckeyes would get in the college football playoff. They did indeed get in at the number 3 slot, and Alabama, of course, finished first, Clemson second, Ohio State third, and then Notre Dame got clobbered and still maintained its top 4 position. And so now, just a short time after Notre Dame got clobbered by Clemson, we will get to see them get clobbered by Alabama.
Yeah, this is going to be ugly. The fact that it's you talked about like the idea of the national critics wanting to point out, Ohio State should never have made it. I think Notre Dame is, you're talking about a program that not only was thoroughly dominated by Clemson in their most recent game, but let's face it. I mean, Notre Dame, anytime that they have had the opportunity to play on a big national scale, they've been failing miserably since 1994, as Tom Orr pointed out. I mean, you're not looking at a program that's ready for prime time, and I think Alabama is going to show that on January 1st.
So this was the big topic, was who's going to get that fourth slot, and Notre Dame gets it, and Texas A&M with a pretty average looking win over a bad Tennessee team. They are fifth. Oklahoma jumps up to sixth at 8-2. Kind of needed some mistakes by Iowa State down the stretch to be able to win the Big 12 championship game. Iowa State fell behind, and it looked like they were going to get blown out, but they fought back in the game and had a real opportunity late in that game. But committed some false starts and just took themselves out of it and dug a little bit too deep of a hole. Iowa State finishes 10th. The Gators finished 7th after losing to Alabama in a game that every time it looked like Alabama was going to blow them out, Florida would get a couple scores and tighten the game up again. So kudos to the Florida offense, although they really didn't do much of anything to slow down Alabama's offense, and that's not unheard of this year. Alabama's pretty much had its way with every defense that it's played. Cincinnati, Chip, though, at 9-0, they win their conference. You've got to feel good about Luke Fickell winning the conference, but they can get no closer than 8th place. And if there was going to be any year where a group of 5 team made the college football playoff, it would have had to have been this year, when there's no clear-cut number 4. And maybe you could make the argument there's no clear-cut number 3.
Completely agree. And for everyone who argues against the expansion of the college football playoff by saying that it will demean the regular season, I would argue that, okay, the regular season that you're saying means so much, Cincinnati is Exhibit A, because, what else did they have to do to justify being included in the college football playoff? They won every game that they played. Now, personally, I think, we were talking about Notre Dame, how they're going to do against Alabama. I don't think Cincinnati would have had a much better shot, but I certainly agree with you. I think this is the year that warranted a team like Cincinnati that went undefeated to get that coveted 4th playoff spot. So it's very unfortunate. I can only hope that the powers that be rectify the situation in the very near future and go to an 18 playoff where conference champions are rewarded and given an opportunity to get a shot at the title.
Yeah, and another team, Coastal Carolina, finished 12th. They were 11-0, Chip, and they put their money where their mouth is this year and said, we'll play anybody. And when they couldn't get a game, their opponent had to cancel, they played BYU and beat them. And that was a pretty good BYU team.
And it was arguably probably the most entertaining game of the college football season when you think about it. The fact that, it came down, it was reminiscent of the Super Bowl when, the Titans and Rams played. I mean, it was almost, the exact same kind of a play, the exact same kind of a finish. And if anything, it demonstrated, like college football games do not need to be scheduled 20 years in advance the way that they have been. The fact that Coastal Carolina and BYU were able to make that happen, I think, on a Tuesday and, make it work and give the fans of both schools as well as a national television audience a lot to really enjoy.
Yeah, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that might have been the best game in college football this year. It was a fantastic game. Anybody that watched that knows what I'm talking about. That was a fun game to watch, and if you can find it, a replay of it or highlights or whatever, go and look at it. It was a fun game to watch, and I enjoyed the heck out of that. It almost made you think maybe they should just put names in a hat and then draw your opponent that way, and then 3 days later you show up and you play. Because if it's going to be that entertaining and that competitive all the time, then that's what we should do every time out.
Wouldn't be a bad idea. It's certainly better than what we're doing now.
The Mountain West Conference championship was San Jose State. They beat Boise State to win their conference 7-0. They finished 22nd. They
like I
finished
said, it's just
They were sandwiched right between 3-loss Oklahoma State and 3-loss NC State.
I mean, it just keeps going back to the fact that, everyone's like, oh, like the regular season, means so much and we can't expand the play. It's like, okay, all these teams, they basically are being told, yeah, you're not worthwhile for a major bowl game. I think it's just lending itself to more and more of it's giving more and more ample evidence as to why the system needs to be completely overhauled.
Yeah, I think so. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a strange. I mean, from year to year, you never know what's going to happen. You never know what the committee's going to do. They seem to move the goalposts all the time. It's just not great. It's not a great system. It's not the system that we thought we were getting when they scrapped the BCS, and that's a shame because the BCS was fraught with problems. You and I grew up in an era where it was just the polls. Who's the poll? Who are going to be the top two teams in the polls, and that's who meets for the championship in some bowl game somewhere. And sometimes not even that. Sometimes it was, okay, Ohio State's playing in this bowl game and they're ranked 2, so they need to beat USC and then have this other team lose in their other bowl game. And that was another strange way to determine a championship, but even that seemed less controversial.
It did, but I guess maybe it's just, I realize this is going to be probably an unpopular opinion. I'm of the mindset that, it shouldn't be something that is voted upon. It should be, like everything within Ohio, for high school football is based on computer points, based on, it's, you don't vote on it. It's based on, your strength of schedule, all these kind of things. And I just think that, for all the critics of the BCS, when they took out the computers and allowed it for subjective voting, it's kind of lent itself into this committee approach where, for whatever reason, this committee this year truly valued the SEC above and beyond. Like you said, there were teams with multiple losses being higher ranked than teams that went undefeated. So the whole system needs to be changed. And I just think the sooner the better.
I agree. If you want to know where the rest of the Big Ten ended up, well, Indiana finished 11th at 6-1, Northwestern 14th at 6-2, Iowa 15th at 6-2, and I think that was it. That was all the Big Ten teams that finished in the top 25. Oregon gets back in the top 25 by winning the Pac-12 championship game over USC. They finished 25th at 4-2. As the Pac-12 continues to just be weird.
And Indiana got screwed too. Because it just seemed as though that, no matter what, Indiana was looked upon as the fact that even though they played Ohio State very, very competitively, that they were never going to be rewarded by the playoff committee. So broken record time, but the system just needs to be completely overhauled.
Yeah. All right. Well, one other thing that we learned was that the Rose Bowl is going to Jerry World instead of Pasadena, and so the Alabama Crimson Tide are playing Notre Dame in ostensibly the Rose Bowl, but it's at Jerry World in Texas, and Clemson and Ohio State will play in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans.
Well, let's hope that we are mistaken in our belief that Alabama and Notre Dame, that it's going to be a rout. I'm hoping that we're mistaken and it's far more competitive, because that should be, the first game, and then leading into the Sugar Bowl, which we're going to talk about in much greater detail next week.
Yeah, that would be good, but then that would, the committee would be like, oh, see, we got it right. And then they would not be forced to deal with their methodology. This is a committee, Chip, that has just made bad choice after bad choice, and I'm not even talking about subjective choices like where to rank college football teams. I'm talking about the fact that everything they do could be done over a Zoom call, and yet they travel across the country to meet in person every week in a global pandemic. That's not the action taken by a group of people made up of superior intelligence.
Yeah, certainly, like you said, this all could be handled remotely. We all have to make better decisions about when we go out and like you said, in a global pandemic, meeting to discuss this, in terms of the ranking of college football. This is certainly something that would qualify as a certain task that could be accomplished remotely.
Indeed. All right, Chip, are there any other topics we need to cover this week, or are we good?
No, I think we're good. I want to wish you and your family and friends a very Merry Christmas, and I hope you stay safe. We're talking about making good decisions, all that kind of good stuff. So, and that goes to all of our listeners. I wish you all Merry Christmas. Make good decisions. Try to limit your social gatherings. Practice safe social distancing, all that good stuff. And looking forward to talking about the Sugar Bowl in greater detail next week.
All right, that's what we'll do then. Happy holidays to everybody. You can, of course, find us on Twitter. Chip is at Chip Minnich, and you spell his last name Minnich. And you can find me at Mike36Fan, also on Twitter. And you can ask us questions there, and we will be happy to answer them on our next show if you have any questions. So get those questions in ahead of next week. A lot of you are going to be off work, so one of the things you can do when you're off work is to think of some questions you want to ask us, and then hit us up there. Check out Buckeye Scoop. We have a new and improved website. It's so new and so improved that I don't have my permissions necessary to publish yet, so I have to send my stories to Tony Gerdeman and have him post them. But we're trying to iron that out. The same thing happened when the site first went live, so it's just a matter of those in charge that are exceedingly busy finding time to deal with the lowly people like me that cause problems and take up their time. But check out BuckeyeScoop.com if you haven't done so yet. Become a subscriber and go check out our Ask the Insiders section. Our forums are better than ever, Chip. Have you had a chance to look at those? I
have. Be patient with us. I know the new and improved site, has caused some challenges, as Michael said, but I certainly think that it's certainly a step in the right direction.
Indeed, and you can also check out all of the various shows. We have a ton of great podcasts on the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network, the Morning Scoop, Daily Buckeye Show with Tom Orr, always having great guests on every day. Scoop World Order with Kirk Barton, Nevada Buck and Bill Green. You got Around the Oval with Alex Gleitman. You got Gibbs and the Bank, the best recruiting show on the interwebs. Vegas Knows. You got the Sloopcast. You've got us. It just feels like we're walking among giants, Chip.
Very, very apropos term. Absolutely. In terms of like the talent that has been assembled by Buckeye Scoop, I certainly think that's a very apropos term.
And no, I didn't forget Buckeye Weekly. Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr, they put in the work. I can't think of anybody who will podcast for more reasons than those two. It's like, oh, Ryan Day sneezed. Let's do a podcast about it. And I kid, but it's not much of an exaggeration. Every time there's some news, these guys, their show is called the Buckeye Weekly, Chip. And yet, I think usually they're going to do 3 shows for free and 1 for their Patreon subscribers. So just an insane amount of podcasting going on between those two and their other podcast responsibilities, because Tom does the morning show every day, a morning scoop, and then usually once a week at least, Tony's on that show. Tony's on some of the other shows. So, man, I mean, we got guys that they're putting in the work, and they are insiders for a reason.
Precisely.
All right, well, that'll just about do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you think about it over the holidays and you have a couple of minutes free time, if you want to head on over to iTunes and give us a star rating and leave us a nice review, that'd be great. Costs you nothing. It helps us go up the rankings a bit and get seen by more people. So we would appreciate that. And we will be back, Chip, next week to preview the game against Clemson. It seems like we're always playing Clemson, and, quite frankly, I'm tired of those orange helmets.
You and me both, man.
But until Ohio State wins one of these, I guess we're stuck with it.
Yeah, let's see if Ohio State can break that winning streak that Clemson has on us, and hopefully get 2021 off to a good start.
All right, well, we hope that's the case. Chip, I expect you to do a lot of film breakdown with the All-22 film this week, so you can come ready to talk Ohio State, Clemson in the Sugar Bowl. And, it's here, man. We got the bowl season is here, such as it is this year. There's some weirdness, Army not getting a game and all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, you and I have been thirsting for some kind of normalcy all season, and bowl season is certainly a normal part of our annual traditions, and so I'm happy that we have this time, and of course every season goes by much too quickly, so savor those bowl games, Chip.
Certainly will. Going to try and find time. I'm going to certainly try and find time during my day job, to sneak away and see what's going on.
Indeed. All right, we'll be back next week. Thanks for listening, and nothing to do now, Chip, but say, go Bucks!
Go Bucks!